This is the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is September 29th, 2022. This is our 121st episode. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. We are living through a time of conspicuous change where each week brings new developments of a magnitude that could shape or even determine the future of humanity. The past 2 weeks, no exception. The United Nations held its annual sessions in New York City, where the leaders of the countries of the world spoke from the podium to stake out their positions on the world stage. The war in Ukraine, contention between the United States and Russia and between the U.S. and China, the uprising of women in Iran, and the existential threat of climate change all were at the top of the agenda. And today's RNL Revolution Nothing Less show will address all three of these sharp fault lines. Here at the RNL show, we have felt great joy at the heroic struggle of the women of Iran, now joined by many men as it continues to grow against the brutal, misogynist Islamic Republic theocratic regime. We're going to come back to that in a moment with video and an important statement from the Revcoms, as well as from the revolutionary communists from Iran. But first, we want to talk about a very dangerous countertrend, the intensifying possibility of war, even nuclear war, between the U.S. and its imperialist rivals, Russia and China. We begin with the U.S. and Russia, Putin and Biden.
И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны, для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф. Граждане России могут быть уверены, территориальная целостность нашей Родины, наша независимость и свобода будут обеспечены. Подчеркну это еще раз. Всеми имеющимися у нас средствами. А те, кто пытаются шантажировать нас ядерным оружием, должны знать, что роза ветров может развернуться и в их сторону.
Whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever you believe, that should make your blood run cold. Because if nations can pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, then we put at risk everything this very institution stands for, everything. I reject the use of violence and war to conquer nations or expand borders through bloodshed. Now, it's no secret that in the contest between democracy and autocracy, the United States and I, as president, champion a vision for our world that's grounded in the values of democracy.
I have four things to say about what we've just seen. Number one, bullshit, but bullshit with consequence unimaginable. Number two, Biden's denunciation of Russia by implying that the U.S. has not and does not, quote, pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, end quote, can only be answered with the words of the former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass that we have often quoted on this show, quote, "For revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival," end quote. Just how revolting and barbaric these honeyed words from Biden of rejecting violence and war. Know this. Biden spoke these words after quoting and invoking the theme of Democratic U.S. President Harry Truman at the United Nations when it was founded 75 years ago. Yes, President Truman, who dropped not one, but 2 atomic bombs on Japan, not to end World War II, but to terrorize the people of the world and the United States rivals. And since those nuclear bombings, the U.S. has carried out or masterminded and funded the slaughter of at least 7 million people around the world to expand and maintain or defend its empire. Number three, Biden's framing of this as a struggle between autocracy and democracy is worse than bullshit. It is ideological poison. He is attempting to rally people here in the U.S. and internationally behind the U.S.'s brutal imperialist domination of the people of the world, This is worse than mere hypocrisy. It is a revolting pitch to Americans to reap the spoils of U.S. world domination, as well as an appeal to all who aspire to get in on that themselves. It is way past time for people to break with American chauvinism. And I'm not speaking here of the MAGA fascists with their USA, USA #1 chants. I am speaking of all the decent people who hate this fascism, but are sedating and indulging themselves with all the, quote, thank you for your service, end quote, crap, thanking the warriors of U.S. imperialism for securing the fatted lives of Americans. On today's RNL show, we are going to present a biting excerpt of a talk from the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, that slams on this. Number 4, as we wrote on our website, Revcom.us, what we see in Putin's threats of nuclear war and Biden's thinly veiled retorts of the same is like two preening heavyweight boxers at a weigh-in before a big fight, with each painting his opponent as an intolerable aggressor. The reality is, however, too real, and the war in Ukraine has already exacted an enormous price in lives in Ukraine and Russia, with impact on food supply and the environment around the world, with the danger of the incalculable cost of an all-out war between the U.S. and Russia ratcheted up now to a dangerous place. But Biden is not just escalating threats and military support for Ukraine in the war with Russia. He has ramped up threats against China over Taiwan, an island that is officially recognized as a part of China. Last week on 60 Minutes, Biden provoked China by declaring that the U.S. would defend the island of Taiwan if China were to invade. This is a very big and dangerous deal. It is a major, dangerous move on the world stage. Yet once again, Biden casts all of this as a battle of autocracy versus democracy. In fact, this is a battle between different imperialist powers, the U.S., Russia, and China, over domination of the world, and one which has intensified to a whole other level over the past year. The poison of American chauvinism and the need to break with it is the subject of a brilliant, razor-sharp excerpt of a talk from Bob Avakian, which, as I said before, we will show later in today's program. But the other side, the positive side of the equation this past week, is the heroic and beautiful struggle of the women and many men of Iran that has captured our hearts and deepened our sense of internationalism. Internationalism is at the core of the revolution we are fighting for. Internationalism means the whole world comes first. Our struggle is for the emancipation of humanity all over the world. And so our first segment on today's program will be on this fierce, heroic struggle in Iran. And then later in today's show, we are going to have 2 provocative segments. First will be part 3 of my interview with Raymond Lotta on the environment and how the revolution we are actively organizing for now is the only way that the scale, scope, and roots of the environmental crisis humanity faces can be ripped up, and humanity can get on the road to being fit caretakers of the earth. And then today's show concludes with a provocative segment on Bill Russell, the great basketball player, and how he approached and changed the game, and how this inspired my co-host Sunsara Taylor to think about the leadership of Bob Avakian, and especially Bob Avakian's breakthrough in developing a thoroughly and consistently scientific approach to revolution, to communism, and to the emancipation of humanity. And so with that, I want to welcome Sunsara Taylor.
Andy, it's great to be with you. I want to welcome everybody who is tuning in.
And so, Sunsara, why don't you just take it away? Let's get going.
Since September 16th, Iran has been rocked by beautiful, righteous, and tremendously courageous protest. This inspiring struggle has implications for revolution in Iran, for the people there to break free of the oppression of both the Islamic Republic of Iran and of generations of domination, death, economic strangulation, and threats inflicted by U.S. imperialism. There are also profound lessons for revolution everywhere to be drawn from this struggle. It is the responsibility of all of us to not only draw inspiration from their struggle, but to support it and to oppose all attempts to crush it and to misdirect it. All this is addressed in two important statements at Revcom.us, one by the Revcoms here in this country, and one from the Communist Party of Iran, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist. In our next segment, Andy is going to bring that to you. First, a picture of the magnitude of what is unfolding. The outpourings in Iran were sparked after Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old young woman from the Kurdish region of northwest Iran, was taken into custody by Iran's notorious morality police for allegedly violating their laws, mandating that all women wear a head covering called a hijab. While in custody, she suffered a severe blow to the head and went into a coma. 3 days later, she died. Mahsa's death was more than one young woman's life cut short. Her death concentrates generations of enslavement of women by Iran's fascist Islamic fundamentalist regime. This hatred of women is a core pillar of Iran's reactionary and repressive theocratic regime that has disappeared, tortured, and slaughtered thousands who have dared to rise up against it, and which has politically imprisoned dissidents, artists, journalists, feminists, labor activists, environmentalists, lawyers, and communist revolutionaries. It is fury against all of this that is now erupting in over 80 Iranian cities and towns, including in key strongholds of allegiance to the Islamic regime. Those rising up are not just demanding an end to the hijab laws or a few broader reforms. They are tearing down pictures of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, demanding an end to the whole Islamic regime. It is crucial and inspiring that these women have been joined by huge numbers of men. It's spectacular to see the joy with which hijabs are going up in flames, to see students and teachers at more than 20 universities go out on strike, to read about women who themselves still want to wear the hijab, supporting and feeding young protesters, even opening their doors to offer protection when protesters are chased down by police. To see those rising up, refusing to be cowed, even as dozens have been killed. To see protesters saying Mahsa Amini's name all over the world, from Germany to Brazil, from Canada to Cyprus, from Syria to UC Berkeley, the Netherlands, Turkey, Lebanon, Chile, New York City, Belgium, Greece, and far beyond. Our hearts are with the women and men rising up in Iran. Their fight is our fight, and it is from this perspective, and with a profound feeling of responsibility to the women and men rising up, and to the hope that this has ignited around the world, that we share this next segment from Andy.
Righteous, angry, defiant mass protests are spreading across Iran. Over 80 cities rose up on Saturday alone as women and men with nothing but fists, sticks, and a hatred for oppression faced off against brutal riot pigs and religious fanatics armed with clubs, tear gas, and guns. These protests have grown, intensified, and spread to all areas of the country in the face of heavy and violent repression from the armed authorities of the theocratic and oppressive Islamic Republic of Iran, the IRI. Now ask yourself, what could cause such a ferocious and courageous uprising? For decades, women in Iran have been forced to cover up their bodies and hair with hijab, or headscarves, as if their very beings were something to be hidden, confined, and controlled, as if they must be ashamed of their very human existence, all in the dictate of Islamic religious authorities. And if they dared defy this, then they were accosted on the streets by so-called morality police, beaten and or arrested, and sometimes sent for re-education. Resistance has always gone on against this, but this summer saw the resistance become increasingly public, defiant, and organized. September 13th, when police arrested 22-year-old Mahsa Amini for improperly wearing her hijab, and she ended up dead 3 days later. And when pictures leaked out of her badly beaten body in intensive care, exposing the police lie of a heart attack, it was finally just too much. Dozens of people have been confirmed killed in clashes with security forces. Yet people have reached the point where they are willing to die for justice. Those are our people dancing in the flames. This is our blood running through the streets. These are our hearts beating with the defiance of liberation. 3 key points. 1. This mass uprising against the Dark Ages theocratic rule of the religious authorities is righteous and needs to be supported by everyone seeking a better world. All attempts at repression by the IRI need to be opposed. The Communist Party of Iran, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, bases itself on the new communism brought forward by Avakian. The CPI-MLM is fighting, in their words, quote, the struggle to eradicate every form of oppression and exploitation through communist revolution and the establishment of the new Socialist Republic of Iran. The existence and the work of such a party is a great strength for this struggle and for the people of the world, end quote. As that party declared in their initial statement on these protests, titled Compulsory Hijab and Murder of Women, Key Tools of the Fascist Islamic Republic of Iran to Strangle the Whole Society, they said, quote, the murder of women like Mahsa Amini is an existential necessity for the Islamic Republic. Overthrowing this regime is also an existential necessity for women and for the liberation of all oppressed and exploited in society. The religious, fascist character of the Islamic Republic is embodied in the repression of women who do not give in to servile relationships imposed on it, end quote. Point number 2. This mass uprising opens up real possibilities for overthrowing the theocratic regime. It sharply raises the question to millions of what will it take to finally get free. We encourage everyone to go to Revcom.us and to read and to spread the statements of the CPI-MLM on this recent upsurge, including their statement, the burial of the compulsory hijab, the burial of the integration of religion with the state has begun. Let's finish it. And to support their efforts to bring forth and lead what is needed. A hallmark and defining feature of the CPI-MLM and the new communism of Avakian is a deep analysis of how the oppression of women is interwoven into the capitalist imperialist system, and how the struggle for the liberation of women and against all forms of patriarchal oppression is a driving force for revolution. The struggle of women to be free of tradition's chains is not something off to the side of revolution. It is a key part, a driving force, both before and after the revolution, of the world process of emancipating all of humanity and a world free of all exploitation, oppression, and antagonistic social divisions. Point 3. Joe Biden, as the leading representative of U.S. imperialism and atop the system of capitalism imperialism that enforces these relations of oppression, stated at the UN General Assembly in New York, quote, today we stand with the brave citizens and brave women of Iran who right now are demonstrating to secure their basic rights, end quote. This is complete and utter bullshit, but it is also ominous. First, on the bullshit. Educate yourself to the actual reality of what the U.S. has done in Iran and to the Iranian people. From 1953 down to today, the through line that marks U.S. action towards Iran is America's attempts, one way or another, to dominate the Iranian people and Iran's resources in service of U.S. imperial interests. This is taking many forms through the years, from carrying out violent coups to brutal puppets, from fomenting wars to sanctions that punished and tortured Iran's people. Biden's statements are nothing but part of a decades-long U.S. attempts to weaken the regime and make Iran and the whole Mideast subservient to American needs and designs. And the Iranian regime's antagonism to the U.S. is not that of a government standing up for liberation, but of a low-level gangster fighting for turf against the big mafia don. Neither the U.S. imperialists nor the Islamic theocrats should be supported. Both must be opposed. And as for supporting women, you need to look no further than Saudi Arabia, the stalwart U.S. ally in the Middle East, which is just as misogynist and repressive as Iran. Indeed, look no further than the U.S. itself, where Biden and the Democrats continually conciliate with the theocratic, Christian, fascist, abortion-outlawing Republican Party. But now for the ominous part. The U.S. regards Iran as a bone in its throat and will very possibly use not only economic and diplomatic pressure, but other forms of intervention, including by working through and with Israel to subvert the Iranian people's struggle and restore outright U.S. domination. These imperialists must not be allowed to pervert this struggle to their own reactionary ends. And as a key part of this, we need to get into and help spread everywhere the news and the meaning of the struggle, as well as the statements and the documents of the Communist Party of Iran, MLM, which fights today for the liberation of Iranian women as part of the overall process of socialist revolution.
Next, we go to an edited excerpt of a speech that Bob Avakian gave in 2017 called "The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. A better world is possible." As I said, this speech was given in 2017 when Trump was president, but it remains every bit as urgent and relevant today.
In confronting and moving to prevent this, one of the biggest obstacles standing in the way and weighing people down is American chauvinism. The disgusting notion that America and Americans are better and more important than everybody else. This is a poison infecting people broadly in this country, even among the bitterly oppressed. And there is a great need for people to break with this American chauvinism. Free yourself from the GTF, the great tautological fallacy. A fallacy, an idea or way of thinking that is false, wrong. A tautology, a round in a circle way of reasoning that asserts something and then claims to prove it by merely asserting the same thing again. So the great tautological fallacy to which I am referring is the notion that America is a force for good in the world, and therefore whatever it does is good, or at least done with good intentions, even if the same thing, when done by other forces, especially by forces opposed to us, is bad, is evil, because America is a force for good in the world. Thus, in the grip of the great tautological fallacy, when one is told by the authorities and government and the media, etc., that North Korea developing a small number of nuclear weapons and a few long-range ballistic missiles poses a grave threat, one does not question. One does not ask why that is a grave threat, while the only country ever to use nuclear weapons, the United States, having thousands of nuclear weapons and the capability to use them anywhere in the world, is somehow not a grave threat. Under the influence of the great tautological fallacy, one does not stop to think about the fact that in this situation, North Korea could only be developing this weaponry as an attempt to deter an attack from the United States. For North Korea's leaders know that if they initiated an attack, they would face massive, overwhelming retaliation. And from the point of view of the imperial rulers of the United States, such a possibility of deterrence is precisely the problem, because it could in some measure limit the ability of the U.S. to dominate and dictate. But from childhood we are indoctrinated with a notion that America is a shining light of freedom, and the President of the United States is the leader of the free world. Well, when has this been true? Was it true during all the years of slavery? Or during the long years of Jim Crow segregation after the Civil War, when thousands of black people were lynched while leering mobs of white racists celebrated, and black people as a whole were subjected to constant terror? Is this a shining light of freedom now, when black people have to take to the streets demanding, "Stop killing us," because the police kill 1,000 people every year, many of them unarmed, especially black people, Latinos, and Native Americans. When millions of women are battered and huge numbers are raped every year in this country, is this a shining light to the world? And what is this free world? Does it include the countries where the U.S. has backed and armed military juntas and other oppressive dictatorships with their bloodthirsty death squads terrorizing the people over the last 100 years and more throughout Latin America and many other parts of the world? Does it include today countries such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey, all allies of the U.S. and all ruled by brutally repressive governments? Or what about the Philippines, where the government has carried out the cold-blooded murder of more than 10,000 people within the last year, and the head of state, Duterte, openly boasts of this? Does the free world include Israel, a nuclear-armed state that has occupied Palestinian land in flagrant violation of UN resolutions for 50 years, and forcibly maintains over 1 million Palestinian people in Gaza in what amounts to an open-air prison, living barely above survival level, and subject to repeated bombardment by Israeli armed forces, which in 2014, with full support from the U.S. government, headed then by Obama, killed over 2,000 people in Gaza, the overwhelming majority civilians, hundreds of them children. Is all this the free world? Once you remove the blinders of the great tautological fallacy, it can be seen that the free world simply means those parts of the world that are under the domination of or are friendly to the United States, no matter how monstrous their ruling classes may be, while the non-free world is made up of those who remain outside of, and especially those who oppose opposition or obstacles to the domination of the U.S. empire. The U.S. government wages war in Africa and Asia as well as the Middle East, claiming it is fighting to defend civilization against the brutal and murderous Islamic fundamentalist jihadists. But the imperialists of the U.S. are certainly no less brutal and murderous. And the civilization they boast of is literally built on the blood and bones of people all over the world. And why is this Islamic fundamentalism such a force now? Fundamentally, because of the workings of capitalist imperialism itself. Besides the overall role of imperialism in creating more favorable soil for these Islamic fundamentalists, actions of the U.S. imperialists have further fed their growth. In the 1980s, the U.S. actually armed and built up Osama bin Laden and other Islamic fundamentalists to strike at the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. In 2003, in violation of international law, the U.S. invaded Iraq to overthrow the head of government there, Saddam Hussein. This invasion was carried out under the cover of lies that Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. This invasion and the occupation of Iraq by American forces that followed caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, set off bloody conflicts among the Iraqi people, and created more fertile ground for Islamic fundamentalist forces. And the same thing happened in Libya. Under the presidency of Barack Obama, and with the insistent urging of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, the U.S. intervened in a conflict within Libya on the side of forces opposed to the longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi. With the fall of Gaddafi, which was brought about mainly as a result of massive bombing of his forces by the U.S. and its allies, the rivalries and conflicts within Libya were intensified and Islamic fundamentalist forces gained strength. Or take the case of Iran. In 1953, the CIA engineered a coup that overthrew a popular government that was moving to nationalize the oil of the country so that it could be used for the development of its economy instead of being controlled and plundered by the U.S. and Britain. This coup brought the Shah of Iran to power, and the people of Iran suffered decades of torment and torture at the hands of the Shah and his secret police. And here again, these actions of the U.S. created more favorable ground for the forces of Islamic fundamentalism, which ultimately seized power through the revolution that overthrew the Shah in 1979. These are only a few examples of the American crimes that have been committed and the kinds of consequences that have followed from these crimes in countries all over the world. And all this underlines the crucial importance of casting off the blinders of the great tautological fallacy and breaking with American chauvinism. We need to think about humanity first and above all.
All right, Raymond. So we've spoken about this. The big picture is really the problem of this climate bill from Biden. But now we really need to drill down a little bit deeper. In the article, you write that to seriously deal with climate change, you would have to put the fossil fuel companies out of business, seize their assets, and leave most of the fossil fuel in the ground. And for that to happen, for society to interact with nature in a sustainable way, you need a revolution to overthrow this system, end quote. Well, why is it that you can't make the necessary changes under this system? Why can't we put the fossil fuel companies out of business, seize their assets under this system?
Yeah. Look, there are a number of factors here. The most important is what we've been talking about through the course of this interview, Andy, and that is that fossil fuels are foundational to the profitable functioning of this capitalist imperialist system. Did it have to be that way? No. But this is how it has evolved. And what that means is that there's huge amounts of investment capital that are tied up, in pipeline, in infrastructure, the transport, in the ways in which the whole industrial grid and agriculture with the use of petrochemical fertilizers. And the way it works under capitalism is that you don't just write that off. We're talking about billions and billions, in the fossil fuel industry alone. That investment has to be recouped. And you have bank loans, profit earning, yielding bank loans. All of this that has been sunk into not just the fossil fuel industry, but the whole way in which this economy and society are structured. And if you kind of say, oh, we're going to kind of say no to this, we're going to pull the plug on it, that would unleash an economic earthquake in terms of the functioning of this system. Second, as we talked about, the fossil fuel is essential to the strategic military functioning of this system. In other words, the whole enforcement structure, the military machine, the fleets, the bombs, the whole way in which this global system is enforced, that is U.S. imperialism, dominant position, that relies on a military, that is fueled by fossil fuel. And you have something else, a political reality. And that is you have a section of the ruling class, the Republic fascists, who are the climate deniers, who are not going to be well disposed, to pulling the plug, on fossil fuel. So, these are, underlying factors, that tell you that there is no way that there's going to be an order. Remember, we started this interview off with the discussion of mandates. There's no mandate to stop fracking. There's no mandate, to dismantle, the oil pipelines. There's no mandate to say, well, we're not going to have a military that straddles the globe, that consumes oil this way. So this is all a way of saying that it is foundational to the profitable economic functioning, the supply chains, that exist in the third world, the sweatshops, the ships that transport these goods. All of this is wrapped up in fossil fuel.
As people are been conditioned to think in this society today, you couldn't even win people to do this because, first off, you were describing this whole military machine, and people expect to have inexpensive goods. And you were saying earlier in a previous section of this interview that this global supply chain runs on these super tankers that use a tremendous amount of. People want cheap goods. They want stuff. They get outraged when prices go up just a little bit. Panic sets in. People have their private cars, and people believe that America are the good guys and should, be able to do whatever they want to the rest of the world as long as we have a good life here. Or, in a more dominant way, they don't even think about their relationship to the rest of the world. So there's a whole ideological component that would have to be. That you would need in order for people to even to support the kinds of thing you're saying that the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, would never do, which is basically, you're saying, shut down the oil industry and the defense, the U.S. military. That undermines the whole kettle of fish. And maybe we can come at it more by getting into this second question.
Andy, I just want to say that, the point you're making is a very important one. The whole so-called consumer society that exists in the U.S. is both a source of profit and super profit. When you see that the Walmart price, for instance, that people count on, is premised on, savage exploitation of people throughout the world. And then the transport of those goods, requires fossil fuel. So you have a situation in this economy and society where there's almost 2 cars per household. And there's been a statistic that if the rest of the world were to have the same standard of living as the United States, you would need 5 Earths of resources and materials to sustain that. So this is unsustainable. But as you said, people don't think in these terms because it's whoever has the most toys at the end of the day. This is the ethos that is drilled into people, that there has to be a new model of an iPhone in order for me to be a full human being. This is the mindset, that exists. And what underlies that is everything that we've been talking about. A system of exploitation, and fossil fuels is very much, at the font of that.
So this is important that this sort of me culture, this rampant and parasitic individualism in this country is tied to the system that's all tied in with this kind of environment, and it runs counter to what most people on another part of their thinking would like to see, where the Earth continues, where there is a diversity of species. But this connection means we have a lot of struggle to wage with people. I'd like, though, to move to how would a revolutionary society be able to go about working to solve this?
Yeah, well, look, the first thing is a revolutionary society would put an end to a situation where you have these large mega corporations, that are ruling the economy and are making the investment decisions based on what's profitable. So what's happening in a new liberatory socialist society is that you are able, because you have socialist ownership of the resources of society, the technological capacities of society, you have the ability now to rationally plan, what is needed for the betterment of society and humanity. We need more housing. We need health care. We need a different kind of energy grid. And you go to work on that, and you have the ability to do it. Look, here's what happens under the current system. You have these scientists, for instance, who have issued these alarms about global warming. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. These scientists are not just telling us, what time it is in terms of this crisis. They're also telling us what needs to be done now, urgently, in terms of the transport system, in terms of energy, in terms of how we live and how we commute. Those scientists are cooperating with each other on a global scale, but they can only go so far. The climate change report was reviewed, vetted by members of the fossil fuel industry. I mean, that's how obscene this is. You have people, right, who have all kinds of incredible proposals that are actionable, to transform our energy system, the existing energy system here and in other parts of the world rapidly to renewable, to solar, to geothermal, to wind. But this goes nowhere under the system. These proposals go nowhere because they have to be profitable. They have to be mediated by banks that gather up the investment capital. They have to show immediate return. So you have people, scientists, engineers with proposals that go nowhere. You have people in all walks of life whose creativity, whose determination goes nowhere. They're locked out of any kind of meaningful solution to these problems. Look, people may watch the show, Shark Tank, where they have entrepreneurs, right? And, one of the first questions they ask people with an idea, most of the ideas are not very, bold or visionary, and they're not dealing with environmental issues, but some of them do. But one of the first questions they ask them is, do you have a patent?
Do you have a patent on this?
Anything proprietary about it? Do you have a patent?
Jeff, is it patented?
Do you have a way to monetize that idea? But under socialism, these ideas become the common property. They're not a source of private profit and advancement. So you can go to work on these problems, and you go to work on these problems, with a global perspective, that this is for the interest and the betterment of humanity and the protection of the planet. And the Constitution of the new socialist republic in North America, has made this integral and central to what a new economy would look like. We proceed from the interest of world humanity, the resources, the technology, the know-how. This is to serve the betterment of humanity, the advance of revolution throughout the world, and the protection of the environment. And you're going to challenge people in the new society to see their relationship to each other and to nature in a qualitatively different way. That we are a planet that is facing this existential peril. And we have a responsibility to become caretakers of this planet. And now you can work on these problems in a way that gives you a chance. And I do want to make this point. There's no guarantee that we can save the planet, but this is our only chance to do it. And Bob Avakian has carved out, a strategy for making this revolution, and he has analyzed why we are in a rare time when this revolution becomes more possible because of a ruling class that's at war with itself, and a huge possibility is opening up, Andy, for us to make revolution in the country that is the greatest source of the carbon emissions in the atmosphere.
Raymond, I'd like some of your thoughts about how this environmental crisis is impacting in and feeding into and could be part of the conditions by which a revolutionary people in a revolutionary situation could be forged.
Andy, we started early in the interview about, what is the state of the planet right now? I have a phrase, the foreboding summer of 2022. And we are seeing record droughts throughout the world. We're seeing wildfires, in California. We're seeing, flooding on a scale unseen before. And as I mentioned, you have a situation right now in the world where over 100 million people are refugees, forced to evacuate their homes. And hundreds of millions more people will be in that situation as this climate crisis intensifies. And what we've been getting at here is that this climate act is not simply inadequate, but it is part of the problem, not part of the solution. It is prolonging this dependency on oil. And it is not a program for a transition to a green economy. It is not a program to collaborate and unite with the people of the world. And yet people are experiencing all of the effects of a global, a planetary environmental crisis that is threatening the very ecosystems that make life possible on this planet. And if people can wrestle with the kinds of ideas that we're putting forth here, the analysis of why the Biden plan is not a plan to rescue this planet, and if people can wrestle with the fact that there is an alternative to this, what Bob Avakian has charted out, especially in this Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America. You know, people see the Democrats, they see the Republican fascists, but they don't see in the main right now that there is an actual viable visionary alternative to this that gives us the chance, not the guarantee, to go to work on this crisis. And if people are wrestling with this, if people are being challenged by this, if people are engaging with the new interview with Bob Avakian from earlier this year, if people are going to that Constitution and looking at the episodes on this show, see that there is an actual alternative, then that can become a profound mood changer in a time when people are lapsing into all of this, you know, grabbing hold of false hope on the one hand and hopelessness on the other. And I do think that maybe my message here is what Bob Avakian has called hope on a scientific basis. And that hope on a scientific basis actually is expressed and embodied in this Constitution for a new socialist republic, the principles of socialist sustainable development. This can make an enormous difference on bringing forward a revolutionary people in a time of accelerating and cascading climate crisis.
Okay, Raymond, it's been good to have you on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. The interview over these last weeks is really a real contribution to people being able to understand what the problem we face is and what is the solution. So I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I always enjoy it, and I look forward to more discussions.
Great.
I knew nothing about Bill Russell, the great basketball player and civil rights activist, before I read about him on the pages of Revcoms after he passed away recently. But after that, I went on a bit of a jag learning about him. And around this same time, a friend and comrade of mine reread an essay from Bob Avakian in the book Basics titled A Leap of Faith and A Leap to Rational Knowledge. Two very different kinds of leaps, two radically different worldviews and methods. And we wrangled with this some together. So these two things together got me thinking more deeply about the unparalleled scientific communist leadership that Bob Avakian provides. What a game changer this is for humanity's ability to get free, and the importance of all of us who want to contribute to that process, consciously and continually deepening our ability to apply the same consistently scientific method and approach that BA models, while bringing forward more and more others to do the same. Let me explain. After reading about Bill Russell at Revcom.us, I was particularly interested in what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had written about him as well. Then I followed the links in Jabbar's pieces, then a few more links, and later I listened to an old interview that Terry Gross did with Russell on NPR. As the pieces on Revcom noted, Russell played a tremendous role in speaking up against racism and oppression throughout his life. But the biggest thing I learned about Russell as a player was that he was not only an incredible athlete, but he was always the smartest guy on the court. He'd play mind games.
West all alone. Look at Russell come down. And what a play by Russell!
He would psych them that every time they would go to the middle, they'd look, where's Russell?
Russell blocked shots without blocking them because people wouldn't take shots because they were afraid to take them. He changed the whole game.
One star player recalled how he took a shot and Russell blocked him. He took the shot again and Russell blocked him again. By the third time, this guy missed the shot because he was busy looking around to see where Russell was.
I went around my man, go to him for a layup, and he blocked a couple of shots on me. And then the next time I got around him, I missed a layup looking for him.
Russell played for the Boston Celtics from 1956 to 1969 and was a player-coach for the last 3 of those years. Apparently, the great rivalry of that time was between Wilt Chamberlain, who was an aggressive and record scorer, and Russell, who was the ultimate team player, more known for his intellectual mastery of the game. I watched the two of them interviewed together. Russell was extremely precise and breaking down how he approached play against Chamberlain.
I could never play him the same way 2 games in a row because it would not work. And so through the whole time we played against each other, every game was different.
In contrast, Chamberlain was far less theoretical and even teased Russell for being so intellectual in his answers.
He talks long on his points. That's
When Terry Gross asked Russell how he drilled his team when he coached the Celtics, Russell started by explaining an exercise where they stretched their arms out to the side slowly to identify precisely how far their peripheral vision extended. Then they drilled fast break rebounds where he'd jump, grab the ball, and throw it to someone in the right color jersey who would know exactly where the outer limits of Russell's peripheral vision reached. This way, Russell never had to turn his head before passing. This enabled them to break faster than anyone else. The other teams couldn't keep up. Russell said this cut down on how many shots he personally could score because he'd rarely make it down to the other end of the court before his teammates had scored, usually in less than 6 seconds. Terry noted that Russell was an incredible jumper, but that Chamberlain was a full 5 inches taller. So how did he guard Chamberlain? Russell started by saying that because he was left-handed and Chamberlain was right-handed, Russell didn't have to reach across his body to block him, so that gave him back 3 inches. Then he broke down how you can jump higher when you're blocking than you can when you're shooting, because when you're shooting, the jump becomes part of and is constrained by using its power to project into the shot. So that gave Russell 3 more inches back. All of a sudden, he had the advantage. But Russell stressed he could never play Wilt the same way for long, or Wilt would catch on and overpower him. So Russell never tried to block every shot. Sometimes he'd block. Sometimes he'd just move in close to try to force Wilt to adjust his stance before shooting. Russell would aim for something as slight as forcing Wilt to pivot a mere 2 inches, enough to throw off Wilt's shot and make him miss maybe half the time, but not enough for Wilt to pick up on why he was missing more than usual. This would get inside Wilt's head and throw him off further. You get the idea. So how does all this relate to where I started, to Bob Avakian's leadership and his essay on how people learn and know about the world? In his essay on 2 leaps, B.A. breaks down how one can make a leap from knowledge that is derived from perception, that is literally what one can see or directly experience, to rational knowledge, that is identifying the patterns in what is perceived, and identifying the essential character of different things and the underlying dynamics that hold them together beyond what is outwardly apparent. An example of this that B.A. gives is how, to someone unfamiliar with the game, football can at first seem like a bunch of guys just running around, running into each other in funny outfits. But after observing it for a while, gathering perceptual knowledge, and identifying the patterns, one can make a leap to rational knowledge, to understanding what the rules of football are, and to understanding the game as a whole. After giving other examples and showing how this applies in all realms of reality, B.A. makes this point. Quote, "The understanding of reality that is gained through the leap from perceptual to rational knowledge becomes, in turn, the basis, the foundation from which further perceptual knowledge that is accumulated is analyzed and synthesized to make further leaps of this kind, from perceptual to rational knowledge yet again and then again. So the acquiring of knowledge by individuals and by society and humanity overall is not a one-time thing, but an ongoing process." End quote. Wrestling with this essay from B.A. at the same time that I was learning about Bill Russell made me very conscious of how much science Russell was bringing to bear all the time to the whole game. He didn't just make the leap from perceptual to rational knowledge once to grasp the rules of the game, or just make a collection of further leaps to grasp certain strategies or certain plays. But all the time, he was bringing to bear the full framework of what he understood about the game as a whole, about the various dynamics, about the different particular teams, about the different particular players, about different particular plays, and about how all this came together and what was key at any given time to drive towards his overarching goal of leading his team to win. Certainly, in the moment, Russell was doing all of this more or less reflexively, but his ability to do that was rooted in having deeply internalized all of that theory and developed the ability at a very high level to bring it to bear when thinking on his feet. This parallels how in the New Communism, Bob Avakian takes apart and breaks down all the scientific work and the method that was the basis on which he was able to pivot in the moment when some dogmatic nationalist crashed a talk he was giving back in the 1970s. They raised up a map of the states where black people were concentrated in an effort to challenge what BA was putting forward about how the liberation of black people was bound up with the communist revolution in this country. But rather than being thrown off by this, BA was able to utilize their map to further break down the major changes in where black people mostly lived, having moved through the Great Migration from the rural countryside in the South, where they had largely been sharecroppers, into the cities and urban areas mainly as proletarian workers at that point. And BA used this to make an even deeper case for what this revealed about the revolution that's needed. At one point, BA even asked these nationalists to hold their map up a little higher so he could make this point even more clear to those who were gathered. To get the full example, you really have to read it in the New Communism. It's in chapter 4 and it is worth it. But the point here is that this is a great example of the art of extremely high-level communist leadership. It's filled with intangibles and a certain kind of poetry on the basis of being deeply rooted in science. It's an example of the tremendous confidence and creativity and daring and real optimism on that scientific foundation. The same thing applies to BA's leadership in an ongoing way. If you look over the outline at the back of the New Communism, you'll see a breakdown of all the major dimensions of the New Communism that BA has forged. Each of these is important in its own right, but they're also not static. They're not merely proofs that the system cannot be reformed and needs to be overthrown and replaced with a radically different system, though they certainly do prove this. These breakthroughs are also part of the operational theoretical framework that BA applies in an ongoing way to analyzing the world and how it can be changed. All of this, for example, is what has enabled him to see in an unparalleled way the depth of the crisis that this system is currently in, and how this has given rise to splits within the ruling class that cannot be resolved on the terms that have held this system together for nearly 150 years. This is what has enabled him to see the explosiveness of what is being fought out today in a concentrated way around women's right to abortion, whether women will be enslaved or emancipated. This is what has enabled Bob Avakian to analyze that this is a rare time when revolution is more possible. This is what has enabled him to lay out a roadmap for wrenching something truly emancipating, a real revolution, out of this situation that is right now accelerating towards something terrible, and so much more. In this light, there's tremendous importance for all of us who want to contribute to the revolution that is necessary to emancipate humanity, to not only continually dig into and deepen our grasp of the New Communism that Bob Avakian has forged in all its particular dimensions and as a whole, but most of all, to take up the same method and approach that he does, to continually develop our ability to apply this science in a living, operational, and ongoing way, to do this collectively, and to increasingly bring forward waves of new revolutionary leaders capable of the same. So one final point about Bill Russell. Back in 2001, when Terry Gross interviewed him, she asked Russell if he could still jump. Russell explained that his body doesn't move like it used to. But, he said, I still jump. I jump for joy. And he went into how important it is to never give up jumping for joy. And this, too, relates to the leadership of BA and to the kind of world and beauty that the revolution he is fighting for will bring into being.
Sunsara, thank you for that segment. It was thought-provoking on the what the play of Bill Russell inspired in you to think about the scientific method of Bob Avakian. And that's bringing us to the end of this 121st episode of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show on September 29th, 2022.
That's right. So I want to remind you to please leave a comment. Let us know what you thought of the show, questions it provoked in you, ideas you have, anything else you want to reflect on. Leave a comment below. Like the episode, spread it on social media, and come back next week.
And so with that, for the entire crew of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, I want to say good night. And we'll see you next Thursday night at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Central time, and 8 p.m. Eastern time. Good night.